For over 6 centuries, the Ottoman Empire stood as one of the most powerful political, military, and cultural forces in history. At its peak, it stretched across 3 continents, commanding lands that included the Middle East, North Africa, Eastern Europe, and the Balkans. The empire dazzled the world with its wealth, architecture, scholarship, and military might. Yet, behind the shimmering domes of Istanbul and the splendor of the Topkapi Palace, there existed another, far darker reality: the brutal machinery of Ottoman justice. Punishment in the Ottoman world was never just about crime and retribution. It was a tool of control, a theater of fear, a ritual designed to remind the empire's subjects of the Sultan's absolute power. These punishments were crafted to be as symbolic as they were physical. They were meant to break the body, humiliate the spirit, and sear unforgettable images into the collective memory of society. This is the story of the punishments of the Ottoman Empire, a story of cruelty, spectacle, and the harsh lessons of history. The philosophy of punishment in the Ottoman world. To understand the punishments, we must first understand the philosophy behind them. The Ottomans, like many empires of their time, believed that justice had to be public, visible, and terrifying. Law was not only about fairness, it was about order. The Sultan was not merely a ruler, he was the shadow of God on earth, entrusted with keeping balance in a fragile and often rebellious empire. Crimes were not only personal failings, but threats to the social and political structure. A thief did not just steal property, he undermined stability. A traitor did not simply betray a leader, he challenged divine authority. Thus, punishment had to go beyond the individual. It had to send a message. This is why Ottoman punishments often seem shocking to us today. They were designed with the crowd in mind. Executions were staged in busy squares. Corporal punishments were inflicted in schools, markets, and barracks. Each punishment was a performance, carefully orchestrated to teach obedience, loyalty, and fear. Eye gouging, blinding the traitor. Perhaps one of the most terrifying punishments was eye gouging, reserved for traitors, conspirators, and high officials who had fallen from favor. It was as much symbolic as it was physical. To be blinded was to be stripped of one's ability to lead, to fight, or to inspire rebellion. A man without sight was no longer a threat to the throne. Eyewitness accounts describe how the condemned would be restrained, often in public squares. Sharp irons or knives were used to pierce and remove the eyes, leaving the victim in agony. The punishment was sometimes followed by exile, forcing the blinded official to live the remainder of his days as a living warning to others. Evliya Çelebi, the great Ottoman traveler and chronicler, noted several cases of blinding in his writings. For him, these punishments were not anomalies, a part of the rhythm of Ottoman rule. Symbolically, eye gouging also carried a deeper meaning. Vision was associated with knowledge, power, and dignity. To remove it was to condemn a man to darkness, not just physically, but socially. Beheadings, the swift blade of justice. No punishment was more dramatic than beheading. Executed with a sword or axe, it was swift and final. The condemned was brought before a crowd, forced to kneel, and with one stroke, the executioner ended his life. The Ottomans used beheadings not only as punishment for severe crimes like treason, rebellion, or murder, but also as a political weapon. Heads were displayed on spikes, paraded through streets, or sent to the capital as proof of loyalty or victory. One of the most significant beheadings in Ottoman history was that of Sheikh Bedreddin in 1420. Once a respected judge and mystic, he led a rebellion against Sultan Mehmed I, calling for radical social reforms. When captured, he was executed publicly in the town of Suez. His headless body became a symbol, proof that no ideology, however spiritual, could stand against the authority of the Ottoman state. After battles, it was not uncommon for Ottoman soldiers to decapitate enemy leaders and carry their heads as trophies. This gruesome act demoralized opponents and glorified Ottoman victory. To lose one's head was not only to die, it was to be humiliated in death, reduced to an object of display. The falaka, pain without blood. Not all punishments ended in death. Some were designed to discipline without killing, and among these, the most notorious was the falaka. The falaka was a form of corporal punishment where the soles of the feet were beaten with sticks or rods. Victims were bound, often with their legs raised, leaving the soft flesh of their feet exposed. Soldiers, students, and even respected officials could be subjected to it. The genius and cruelty of the falaka was that it left no permanent scars. To the outside world, the punished man looked unharmed, but the agony was unforgettable. Victims often limped for days, unable to walk or stand, and the psychological fear of the punishment lingered long after the pain had faded. In military settings, the falaka was used to maintain discipline. In schools, it was used to enforce obedience. Even within the palace, slaves and servants could feel its sting. It was a punishment that lived in whispers, a hidden terror, visible only to those who suffered it. Hanging. Justice on the rope. Another common punishment was hanging, especially for crimes such as theft, murder, or rebellion. Unlike beheading, which was swift, hanging was slow, public, and humiliating. The condemned was paraded before a crowd, the noose placed around his neck, and then lifted or dropped into eternity. Hangings were often staged in central marketplaces, ensuring maximum visibility. The body was sometimes left suspended for days as a grim warning to passers-by. The Ottomans also used variations. Some criminals were impaled upon hooks, their bodies left dangling in agony. Others were tied to poles and strangled slowly. Each variation carried the same message: the empire's justice was merciless. Hanging was not just about punishment, it was about spectacle. The condemned became part of a theater of death, his final struggles reinforcing the empire's authority. Amputation. The price of theft. For thieves, the punishment was often amputation. Hands, the instruments of theft, were cut off. Sometimes feet were removed, crippling the criminal for life. This was not unique to the Ottomans, it was common in Islamic law, but the Ottomans practiced it with a theatrical severity that left lasting impressions. Amputation was usually public. The condemned was restrained, the limb struck with a sharp blade, and the bleeding stump displayed before the crowd. The message was clear: steal once, and you lose the very tool you used to steal. Beyond physical suffering, amputation carried social consequences. Mutilated criminals became living reminders of justice. Their disfigurement made them outcasts, forcing them to live in shame. Strangulation, the bowstring of the palace. For members of the Ottoman elite, especially disgraced viziers, princes, or high officials, the preferred method of execution was strangulation with a bowstring. This method was considered more dignified than public beheading or hanging. The condemned was often summoned to the palace, presented with the sultan's decree of death, and then quietly strangled by mute executioners. The bowstring was silent, leaving no blood to desecrate the palace floors. It was execution as ritual, swift yet suffocating, an invisible death hidden from public eyes. Perhaps most famously, several Ottoman princes rivals to the throne were executed in this way as part of the empire's practice of fratricide, where new sultans eliminated their brothers to secure power. Strangulation was the punishment of the powerful, a reminder that even those closest to the sultan were never safe from his will. Impalement, the terror of the stake. Though more famously associated with Vlad the Impaler, impalement was also used in the Ottoman Empire, particularly in its Balkan territories. The condemned was forced onto a sharpened stake, which pierced the body and left the victim to die slowly, sometimes over hours or even days. The body was then left on display, visible for miles, a horrifying monument of imperial wrath. Impalement was rare, but when used, it was unforgettable. It was the ultimate act of terror, ensuring that rebellion was crushed not only physically but psychologically. Boiling and burning. Other punishments included boiling criminals alive in cauldrons or burning them at the stake. These were rare and usually reserved for extraordinary crimes such as poisoning or betrayal of the state. The sheer horror of these punishments lay in their spectacle. A boiling cauldron or roaring fire drew crowds, and the suffering of the condemned was meant to etch terror deep into the memory of all who watched. Skinning and dismemberment. Some accounts mention even more gruesome methods, such as flaying, removing the skin from the body, or quartering, where criminals were dismembered by ropes tied to horses. Though not common, these punishments existed on the empire's darker fringes, reserved for rebels and enemies whose deaths needed to resonate with unforgettable cruelty. Psychological punishments. Not all Ottoman punishments relied on physical torment. Exile, humiliation, and public shaming were also powerful tools. Criminals might be paraded through the streets, forced to wear symbols of their crime, or displayed in cages. For officials and elites, dismissal from office, confiscation of property, and loss of status could be worse than death. To fall from the palace's inner circle to obscurity was itself a kind of execution, social death. The role of public spectacle. What unites all these punishments is their public nature. Justice in the Ottoman Empire was not hidden behind walls. It was displayed openly, deliberately, and dramatically. Crowds gathered, Children watched. Merchants paused their trade. The condemned became actors in a deadly performance, and the audience absorbed the lesson. Loyalty meant survival. Disobedience meant agony. Punishments were not only about crime and retribution. They were about politics, control, and the reinforcement of imperial authority. The legacy of Ottoman punishments. Today, the punishments of the Ottoman Empire shock us with their brutality. But in their time, they were neither unusual nor extraordinary. They were part of a global tradition where fear was the foundation of order. From medieval Europe to Ming China, from the Roman Empire to the Persian courts, empires have long used spectacle and cruelty as tools of power. The Ottomans were no exception. Yet, in their punishments, we glimpse the fragility of even the greatest empires. For all their strength, they relied on fear to maintain control, and fear, though powerful, is never eternal. The Ottoman Empire eventually fell, but its punishments remain in history as chilling reminders of the cost of power and the price of rebellion. Conclusion: the story of Ottoman punishments is not just about cruelty. It is about the philosophy of rule, the theater of fear, and the dark side of justice. From the blinding of traitors to the silent bowstring of the palace, from the Falaka's hidden agony to the fiery death of rebels, each punishment carried meaning beyond pain. Each was a warning, etched into flesh and memory, designed to hold together one of the largest empires the world has ever seen. And though centuries have passed, the images remain grim, unforgettable, and haunting echoes of a time when justice was written not only in law, but in blood.